Good morning, the great Midwest cities, towns, villages throughout our listening area. This is Jim Santel. I am once again delighted to be with you on this bright and sunny morning in downtown Waukesha. We're coming to you directly from the studios of WAUK Radio. That's the Shaw in Waukesha. It's 540 AM, 101 FM. Again, Jim Santel, Morning Cannolis. This is our weekend review of the important stories in law, in government, and yes, also the aspiration for justice in America. Thank you so much for joining me. We have a full package of information pieces to chat about this morning, to review from this past week and beyond. Today is also a special presentation, a special program here on Morning Cannolis, because we're going to be spending a lot of our time in the second portion of this first hour and then going into the second hour talking about a major, significant anniversary in the civil rights, the human rights history of our nation and our world, and that is the violence, the shooting at the Sikh temple, the Gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, 10 years ago yesterday. And today and tomorrow, in addition to this past week, items of commemoration, times of gathering for the community there in Oak Creek. We'll tell you more about those at the end of our second hour, ways in which you can participate today and tomorrow in recognizing, in acknowledging the problems of our nation still when it comes to violence and the challenges faced by religious communities nationwide, but also recommitting to a time of greater peace and understanding among all peoples. So lots of things going on in Oak Creek. We're going to go back and tell you exactly what happened there 10 years ago yesterday, revisiting some of the specific stories of that time. But today is a Saturday, August 6th. It is the 218th year of the calendar, 147 days left to go. Normally at this time, I review 4 or 5 or 6 significant events in the history of our world, our nation, our state. This morning, just two of those. It was on August 6th of 1945, 77 years ago today, that we dropped a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. More power than 120,000 tons of TNT. Killed anywhere from 70 to 140,000 people. Estimates vary dramatically, as you can well imagine. Know that from history as well. The bomb itself, called the Little Boy, 130 pounds of uranium-235. The first time in human history that a nuclear weapon used on any civilian population by the United States of America. Certainly devastating to Japan, bringing undeniably a sooner conclusion to World War II. Nonetheless, an important milestone in the history of humankind on this planet. We know as well 3 days later, August 9th of 1945, a second bomb dropped on Nagasaki, and again, bringing the Second World War perhaps to a sooner conclusion, but nonetheless, a significant event because of that huge event in Japan on these days in 1945, 77 years ago. Jumping ahead quite a bit, 57 years ago, it was on August 6th of 1965 that President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We have talked a lot about the Voting Rights Act on this very program. Other times when I have had the great privilege and honor of coming into your homes and your businesses to talk about the very significant decisions of the United States Supreme Court in recent years affecting the Voting Rights Act. It was on August 6, 1965, that Lyndon Johnson gathered a number of civil rights leaders, gathered the community together at the White House to sign the Voting Rights Act of 1965, establishing, among other things, these nationwide protections for voting rights, especially those areas, those jurisdictions that are imposing restrictions principally on people of color, principally our black populations that were being denied, abridged the right to vote under our Constitution on account of race or color, is the way that the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act sets forth that prohibition. Other prohibitions prohibiting literacy tests and other devices that were historically used to prevent people of color from voting in this country. We know as well that Sections 4 and 5 also established the so-called coverage formula and a pre-clearance procedure that required But those jurisdictions that had historically at that time and in the years that followed, had developed a tradition, a practice of engaging in discriminatory practices when it comes to prohibiting people of color from voting. In those instances, before changes could be made in the voting rights laws of those jurisdictions, you had to get authorization from where? The United States Department of Justice, the Attorney General, and the Civil Rights Division looking at all of those. That was called the pre-clearance procedure, the enforcement under the coverage formula of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and until a case called Shelby County during a recent administration, the full force and effect of the Voting Rights Act to ensure the franchise was extended to all people in this nation was in full force. And then in Shelby County, the United States Supreme Court, in a case authored by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, found that Sections 4 and 5 were unconstitutional because they no longer represented, in Justice Roberts' view and the view of the majority of the Supreme Court, the status of civil rights and the prohibitions on people of color to vote in America. Felt they had to be updated, and so found that the interaction of Sections 4 and 5 was unconstitutional, and basically removed those from the strong capacity of the law to ensure that voting rights are permitted and enforced for all people. And then just last year in August of 2021, another major decision, case called Brnovich, named after the Attorney General of the state of Arizona, a fellow who is still in the news these days. Case in which the Supreme Court dealt yet another blow to the Voting Rights Act of 1965 by supporting, under Section 2, the authorization of the Arizona legislature to impose some regulations, some restrictions, frankly, on the manner and means of voting in Arizona that many people feel strongly inhibited the capacity of the Department of Justice to go forward. To this day, Sections 2, Sections 4 and 5 are not routinely accessible to the United States Department of Justice as it was envisioned 57 years ago today. Nonetheless, there are remedies for that pending in the Congress. We have talked about those before, especially under the name of John Lewis. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed by the United States House of Representatives, still waiting for passage by the Senate to restore the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to where it was 57 years ago today. This landmark piece of legislation passed, and now not nearly as strong and impactful as it was at that time. Both very significant events in the history of our nation, August 6, 1945 and August 6, 1965. On this day. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. This is Morning Cannolis. We're also going to be taking your phone calls throughout this morning, our first hour, our second hour in particular. And again, our syllabus includes a lot of focus on the history of this day and years that have followed since that time in the wake of the Sikh temple shooting, the Sikh Gurdwara shooting that happened on August 5th, 10 years ago yesterday. We're going to chat about what exactly happened that day as a way of understanding our history, and then going to spend a lot of time talking about what has happened since that time. Things that have been undertaken, yes, by the Sikh community nationwide, locally, but also by many, many people to address what happened there. As we know well, gun violence continues to be a major issue in our nation, and we also know that places of worship under the First Amendment continue to be places that are most regrettably, most unfortunately, tragically, horrifically targeted by some people who feel that that is an appropriate way of pursuing their own very narrow, very hate-inspired agendas. And so we're going to think about all of that today and spend some time discussing about that. But before we get to any of that, in our first minutes and perhaps even our first segment and beyond this morning, I'm going to be chatting about four major stories, most of which were somewhat in the news, but principally undercovered from my perspective this past week, that also impact who we are in our nation and where we have been. I began by talking today and inviting your conversation, inviting your attention to our second major movement this morning, chatting about the Sikh temple shooting. Guns, as you know, animate lots of our lives in America, again, with great tragic consequences. That includes the consequences of January 6th. We know from just this past week that a fellow named Guy Wesley Reffitt, Reffitt, he was convicted in March of this year after going to a trial, which is his right. A jury trial, 5 counts on a case that was in many ways a test case for the Department of Justice. He was charged with a number of different counts, including matters related to the riot, the insurrection on January 6th, 2 counts of civil disorder. He also carried a .40 caliber pistol during that riot, also a part of the presentation during the trial. A jury finds him guilty of all of those charges. Mr. Reffitt did not go inside the Capitol on that day, but in many ways, his conviction, the sentence imposed this past week by Judge Daphne Friedrich, she looked at all the circumstances and imposed a 7-year and 3-month sentence upon him, the highest sentence, the most extensive sentence to date imposed upon any defendant in the January 6th prosecutions, and specifically said, the fact that you didn't go into the Capitol does not make this less important. She basically went in the opposite direction and said, because plainly you brought a gun to that location. And also another significant portion of this, he was at the tip of the spear, as many people say, encouraging people to break in, to do the violence, to engage in the activity that led to the deaths of people, huge numbers of injuries to our law enforcement authorities and others. And significantly, Guy Reffitt, at the time of his return to his home, told his children, his son and his daughter, not to tell anyone. He threatened them and said that if any of them went to law enforcement, he would impose upon them some responses to that. He said, traitors get shot. And that also a part of the prosecution. Guy Reffitt, this past week, sentenced to more than 7 years in prison. And nonetheless, he's going to be appealing that. A major case in the wake of the January 6th prosecution. Guy Reffitt says this: I did want to make an apology. In 2020, he said, I was a little crazy. Everything went a little stupid. Well, regrettably, we've got an awful lot of people who did an awful lot of stupid things, violent things that undermine our history, things that undermine our traditions on January 6th of this year. We're going to talk about other stories of this past week, also regrettably involving violence. Right after this break, we're here at WAUK Radio. This is the Shaw in Waukesha. This is the Morning Cannolis. Join us at 844-967-2789. This is Jim Santel. This is Morning Cannolis. We're talking this morning, as we always do, Saturday mornings from 9 to 11, about law, government, and justice in America. Right before the break, I was reviewing with you some of the major and perhaps underreported stories of this past week, as we always do, chatting about Guy Reffitt right before the break and the conviction and sentence imposed upon him, a man who brought a gun to the Capitol on January 6th, going to be spending time in federal prison as a result of that, plainly expressing some regret to the federal district court judge before whom he appeared. Nonetheless, a lesson in deterrence, not only for Mr. Reffitt to ensure that he doesn't do this anymore, but also a message I would offer to deterrence generally, that people who engage in this kind of conduct, you will in fact be investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, prosecuted by the United States Department of Justice, and we know that there are about 800 other people who fall into that same category. category. And we also know, reaffirmed this past week, that with respect to other people who were in charge of organizing things on January 6th, people like the Three Percenters, of which Mr. Reffitt was probably a member, Proud Boys, others out there, they're also being charged with seditious conspiracy to overthrow the government. And we know once again with absolute clarity that the U.S. Department of Justice is also has convened a grand jury that's looking at the top levels of direction, supervision, from the White House, other places. Undeniably, we know that now because people are getting subpoenas to appear before a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C., looking at this statements made by the Deputy Attorney General about the focus of this false electors matter that came out of Wisconsin and other states. Other people, obviously, the results of investigation being contacted by the Federal Department of Justice and the FBI to talk about this, requests for transcripts from the January 6th committee. Undeniably, the United States Department of Justice, in addition to prosecuting those people like Mr. Reffitt who were on the ground on January 6th, not only moving up the chain, but now at the top of that chain. And we will look forward to hearing more from Merrick Garland, our Attorney General, and others about the results of those grand jury presentations in the weeks and perhaps months ahead. Three other stories before we get on to our principal topic this morning, which is once again the 10-year anniversary of the Sikh Gurdwara shooting in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Three other stories that also are significant in the category of justice and law enforcement in America. This one, also a matter of charges. This one coming out of the Federal District Court in the U.S. Attorney's Office, the U.S. Department of Justice in Louisville, Kentucky. The listeners will remember well that in a nighttime raid in March of 2020, more than 2 years ago, officers entered into the home of Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend that night. An officer engaged initially, the boyfriend responded, and the melee that followed that resulted in Ms. Taylor, this 26-year-old emergency room technician, being killed in the violence that happened as a result of what can only be regarded as a terribly mishandled and misconducted search and entry into that home. Well, it turns out, as many of us suspected, even from the public reporting on this at the time, that this was more than simply a mismanaged matter involving law enforcement on the execution of the warrant. This is much more than that. And this past week, the Attorney General announced charges on officers who were responsible for obtaining that search warrant in the first place. So let's step back and do a little bit of civics on this as well. In order to get a warrant under the Fourth Amendment, or right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, and that is construed to mean that before any federal officer, a state officer can get entry into your home without your consent, a federal magistrate, a state court judge, someone in a judicial capacity has to take a look at the evidence presented and find that there is probable cause to believe that inside that home, somewhere on those premises, there is evidence of a crime. So this is not a matter where simply agents can go in because they've got some belief that there is evidence of a crime. A federal judge has got to take a look at it. A state judge, a state magistrate's got to review that information and specifically authorize that to happen. The charges that came out of this particular case this week announced, and again, we hasten to add that, as always, defendants in our state and federal systems are presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by a jury or otherwise consent to enter a plea in this case. The charges say that two detectives and a police sergeant falsely claimed in the supporting affidavit before that judge to obtain that warrant that the former boyfriend, the colleague, the friend of Breonna Taylor, again, terribly killed in this incident, had been receiving packages at the apartment when, in fact, according to the indictment against these law enforcement officers, they had no such evidence, that there really wasn't evidence, and that they misrepresented this case to the judge who authorized that raid, premised apparently in large part upon that false information. One of the agents knew the claim was false, didn't object to it, and added what they described as misleading claims that the former boyfriend was using the address as Ms. Taylor's apartment to get these packages. And so fundamental misrepresentations about the predicate to get into the house in the first place. Third officer also charged with an investigative unit, lack of supervision there, approving that affidavit, knowing that it contained this false information. And so a very, very significant indictment this past week. It does not bring Breonna Taylor back to life, as we know well. Her death remains a tragedy in this nation, but it underscores as well the importance of law enforcement to do its job, not just competently. We know beyond that the very execution of this improperly issued, improperly predicated warrant was done in a terribly violent and inappropriate manner. Nonetheless, we have charges this past week that because of this, Ms. Taylor and others were deprived of their rights under the Constitution of the United States of America to be free from unreasonable search and seizures. In this case, it led to Ms. Taylor's death. Very significant item in the history of our nation this past week. And then we also know as we go into break that coming out of another violent event, that is the violence at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. 19 first graders, 6 educators shot there. This past week, some important information coming from a civil jury in Texas this past week involving misstatements, lies, misrepresentations. Call them all of that. You'd be accurate in doing so. By Alex Jones, who said, among other things, that violent activity, those deaths never happened. None of this is made up. As a result of what the jury did there, Mr. Jones, as we'll talk about beyond the break, facing not only compensatory damages, but also now punitive damages. We're going to chat more about what that means. We're going to talk about the implications of that for Mr. Jones and the things he's got to face down the road yet as we continue to have our discussion this morning and go into our next break here on Morning Cannolis with Jim Santel. We invite you, as always, to call in at 844-967-2789. Let's continue this morning our discussion of some of the major news stories from this past week. Right before the break, we were reviewing this story coming out of Texas and a jury there that had imposed now punitive damages on Alex Jones, who was this fellow who for many years through his group called Free Speech Systems had parlayed this misinformation, peddled this misinformation about the Sandy Hook shooting, and was previously found liable for defaming the victims' families there, spreading these bogus theories that the shooting had been part of a government plot to confiscate America's firearms, and the victims' families had been complicit in that scheme, a complete fabrication, a lie, as we all know, for a long period of time. Previously, once again, he was found liable for that. The recent proceedings before the jury in the trial court there would determine how much money he would have to pay to the families, and in particular, parents named Neil Heslin and Scarlett Lewis, the parents of young Jesse Lewis, who was 6 years old at the time that he and some 18 other first graders, along with their 6 teachers, were killed at Sandy Hook. And so earlier in the week, the jury found that there would be a award of $4 million in compensatory damages. What are compensatory damages? That means the things that are provided to, are supplied to a plaintiff in this particular case, to ensure that they are at least trying to make them whole. Great amount of information presented during this portion of the trial to indicate, to prove to the jury that these parents and others had suffered greatly, pursued by followers of InfoWars and Alex Jones, had to relocate many, many times, had to be secret and clandestine about where they're moving because of the threats against them, profoundly changed their lives. And as a result of that, as a result of that, the jury found that to compensate them, to try to make them somewhat more whole, always incomplete, the jury awarded $4 million. And then just yesterday came back and awarded a whopping $45.2 million in punitive damages over and above that $4 million amount. What are punitive damages about? It's what the word says. It's purely punitive. It is punishing you for doing the behavior. Compensatory damages, once again, restoring you, trying to give you some sense of money to make you whole, to restore what was taken from you as a result of the misconduct. And again, in this case, these wild, unsupported, and harming reports about what did and did not happen at Sandy Hook. Punitive damages simply saying we are punishing you for doing what you have done. And so a huge result coming out of that Texas jury. Undeniably, a number of things going to be undertaken by Alex Jones' attorneys, including, once again, a threat to go into bankruptcy court. We know that there is yet another lawsuit in Connecticut going ahead next month in Connecticut. Again, the same kind of thing, alleging that Mr. Jones, as a result of his misinformation, his lies, his peddling these false statements about Sandy Hook, caused damage. But this past week, again, nearly $50 million imposed upon him in compensatory and punitive damages, again, for his wild misconduct in misrepresenting to America, causing great harm, not only to the families, but also to our nation, in encouraging people to believe things that are not true, a common theme that we have seen over and over again. And finally, our other big news story this past week, which I suspect many, if not all of you, have followed, and a secondary story in the same vein, probably less covered, and that is abortion rights. We know from the Dobbs case, Dobbs versus Jackson, Women's Health Organization, from late June 24th of this year, that the United States Supreme Court, in an opinion written for the majority by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, the Supreme Court overruled Roe versus Wade, another case called Casey, finding that there was a constitutional right to abortion, overruled that finding that was in place for nearly 50 years, and instead found no such predicate in the Constitution, sending this back basically to the states to act and to pursue their own remedies as they choose to address the issues in ways that legislatures and the public should address this issue. Again, stripping away this long-standing privacy right under the Constitution for the entire nation, nonetheless coming back to the states. And so this past week in both Kansas and Idaho, some important developments. You know the Kansas story. This past week, Kansas voters overwhelmingly, resoundingly decided against removing the right to abortion from the state constitution there. You may recall that in previous times, the state constitution, and to this day, had basically affirmed the right to an abortion in the state of Kansas. Came out of some lawsuits in 2019, a ruling by the Kansas Supreme Court that had struck down some abortion restrictions under the state constitution. So it has been legal and authorized in Kansas. This past week, this goes to a referendum there, overwhelmingly, resoundingly rejected a move to amend the Constitution to prohibit abortions in Kentucky and in Kansas rather, and as a result of that, abortion remains legal in Kansas significantly up to 22 weeks of pregnancy, which is generally viewed these days 22, 23 weeks as a time of viability. That is a result in Kansas that is in fact consistent with Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood. And the other story that comes out of this past week comes out of and devolves from work in Idaho. That is the United States Department of Justice, once again, looking at ways to remedy problems in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision. In this particular case, Merrick Garland announcing that the Department of Justice, United States of America, suing Idaho, the state of Idaho, over a very strict abortion law that was set to take effect this month that would inhibit emergency room doctors from performing performing abortions that are necessary to stabilize, to keep in place the health of women facing medical emergencies. You might think, well, gee, how is that possible in the wake of the rescission of Roe versus Wade? And the answer is that there is a law called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. The Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, invoked by the Attorney General, invoked by the U.S. Attorney's Office there in Idaho, that attacks this attempt by the folks in Idaho to restrict doctors from emergency room access to provide medical care to their patients. The lawsuit argues that this federal law is violated by that. And Garland says in particular, there have been widespread reports of delays and denials of treatment to pregnant women experiencing emergencies. This is an important issue because it underscores the importance, the significance, the movement of the Department of Justice to address abortion rights, address the capacity of people to pursue privacy rights in this country through other means. Now that it's back in the states, to find other statutory and other mechanisms for ensuring what was in fact the law in this nation for nearly 50 years. And again, a significant story, a significant event coming out of Idaho. We'll see what happens with that lawsuit. It's a civil lawsuit. It is not a criminal action, unlike the Breonna Jones matter, Breonna Taylor matter, which we talked about earlier. It is, again, a very important case in the wake of and the midst of the continuing efforts by states in all directions to address our status in the wake of Dobbs and the restriction, the limitations, the rescission of the privacy right under the Constitution of the United States of America. That, a brief summary of some of the significant goings-on in justice in America this past week. And now we're going to turn back to a story, a series of events, circumstances that are going on even as we speak in Oak Creek, hearkening back to the horrific events of August 5th of 2012. August 5th of 2012. We began last week by chatting with you about the Sikh faith, Sikhism, this 500-year-old religion, the fifth largest faith on the face of the planet. Provided you with some information about the basic understandings, including nonviolence and meditation and the commitment to the wellness of the entire human race, self-discipline, the concepts of work and industry, sharing, and most importantly, this thing called Sewa, S-E-W-A, the concept of service to all people, significant for all Sikhs, including those in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, other states of the Union, and across the entire globe. We talked about those last week. Today, in our remaining moments of this hour and into the next segments of our second hour, we're going to be reviewing exactly what happened on August 5th of 2012, talking about the specifics of that day, the memories of that day. We're going to talk as well about ways in which you, this weekend, can be a part of the memories of that time, of the acknowledgement of the horror of those days, but also movements forward as we think about Oak Creek and the 7 people killed, many other injured at that time. Continue to join us this week, this day, as we chat about that here on Morning Cannolis. Join us at 844-967-2789. We're back for the final minutes of this first hour of Morning Cannolis, a review of law and government and the aspiration for justice in America. My name is Jim Santel. Thank you again for joining me this hour as we reviewed some of the major stories in America and began the discussion that will continue into our second hour this morning. I invite you to stay with us wherever you are, because we're going to chat a lot about what exactly happened on August 5th of 2012. We're not going to get into graphic stories stories or accounts of that day, but it's important to remember what occurred in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. It has so unfortunately been repeated so many times in America, not just at places of worship, but in other locations where we live and breathe and go about our lives. And so we're going to talk about that, especially in our second hour this morning here on Morning Cannolis. In our last moments of this particular hour, wanted to tell you about ways in which you yourself can become involved in events in Oak Creek, even as we speak. We do all of this. We do all of this in memory of and recollection of the terrific, horrific sacrifices made by individuals, both people injured, many, many people injured physically, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually. They continue to this day to suffer from those injuries. And then we know as well that the gunman on August 5th of 2012 made martyrs, killed 7 people, all of whom were parishioners, were congregation members, were members of that congregation there at the Oak Creek Sikh temple. And their names, Satwan Kaleka. He was 62. He was the president of the Gurdwara. He was the founder of the Gurdwara. He was the one who was, in major ways, the leader of that organization. We'll tell you more about his specific heroism on the morning of August 5th of 2012. Paramjeet Kaur was 41 years old, a young mother, devoted congregation member, participating in all the activities and events of the Sikh Gurdwara, including that morning, August 5th of 2012. Baba Punjab Singh, 73, he was a priest called a Granthi of the Gurdwara. Baba Punjab was seriously injured on that morning. He lived for 2 more years until March of 2020, when finally, as a result of the wounds he suffered on August 5th, he died. And so he is among those who undeniably killed as a result of this horrific shooting, this hate crime event. He, during the course of his life, even after the shooting, continued to communicate, had what was called Chardikala, this unrelenting optimism about the future. His name and his family, plainly a part of history now because of their being victims of this horrific event. Prakash Singh, 39 years old, just 39 years old, another priest, another Granthi at the Gurdwara, likewise providing service for many years there to the congregation members. His family, heartbroken, crestfallen as a result of his death as well. Ranjit Singh, 49 years old. He was a Raji, R-A-A-G-E-E of the Gurdwara, a hymn vocalist, providing huge and glorious and wonderful music at the Gurdwara for many years as well. Likewise, his life taken on August 5th. Another priest, another Granthi, Sita Singh, 41, likewise martyred on August 5th of 2012. Also a beloved, wonderful member of the congregation, lost to the violence that day. And Suveg Singh, 84, likewise a devoted congregation member of the Sikh faith in that location, someone whose family, again, horrifically, terribly missing him to this day. Those 7 people, Satwan, Paramjeet, Baba Punjab, Prakash, Ranjit, Sita, and Suveg, all today and throughout this weekend and throughout the years that have passed since August 5th, memorialized and remembered as critically wonderful people, a part of this congregation, critically important workers who supported the initiatives both at the temple and beyond in the community. We're going to talk more about that in our second hour. Remember them this day. Remember the people injured as well. Regard them as heroes for reasons that you will learn, if you don't already know this, about the things that they did and the sacrifices they made that day in many ways to ensure that the disaster, the crisis, the tragedy there was not even greater than it already was. And so those are the folks who sacrificed their lives on that day. During the course of this past week, the leaders of the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin, joining with government, including the U.S. Department of Justice and the Community Relations Service, a group that was tremendously important at the time of the shooting, gathering together members of the community as well, other institutions of government, private sector, victim support specialists, all sorts of people gathering this past week to commemorate, to remember the event, and to commission further activities going forward. So let me tell you a little bit about what happened in the past couple of days, and then as we go into our final moments here, the things you can do today and tomorrow also to be a part of the events going on in Oak Creek. This past Thursday at the City Hall, a wonderful engagement about what hate crimes mean today in America, how those are prosecuted here in Wisconsin, in the federal system, in state courts. I was honored at that time to moderate a panel that talked about the ways in which our leadership, our faith leadership, the Muslim faith, the Sikh faith, the Christian faith, Hindu faith, Buddhist faith, all faiths can in fact ensure that their places of worship are safe and secure. Delighted and truly honored to be a part of that program that also focused upon messaging to our larger community, an emotional but supremely human time of assembly at the City Hall. That on Thursday, much of that's still available by way of video for your review and access down the road. And then beginning last night, at 6 o'clock to about 9 o'clock, even 10 o'clock, this amazing vigil. You probably saw, if you have not already done so, you can again pull up videos of this remembrance vigil of August 5th of 2012, including candlelight presentations, impacts by members of the families of those 7 people, the children, the grandchildren, who were obviously 10 years younger, some of them barely remembering the event, now bemoaning the fact that they do not have fathers and mother and grandfathers to include them in their families, talking last night out of their hearts, out of their minds, about the importance of this event, the importance of remembering their lost ones, but also commissioning all of us to do much better in the future to ensure safety and security. Again, I was so very honored to chat about the implications of that day of August 5th and to talk in particular about the things that happened, the good things, the only positive things that came of this tragedy. We're going to talk more about those in our second hour as well, including some amazing educational things now going on in the state of Wisconsin about Sikhs, some amazing things happening at the Oak Creek Library, the largest public collection, non-private collection of Sikh studies materials now that exists, ways in which law enforcement records and memorializes evidence of hate crimes in America, all those changes happening as a result of this horrific event on August 5th of 2012. And so what can you do? How can you participate even today in these events of this past decade or so, beginning at 11 o'clock. Yes, that's right. Just as we're concluding on the air today, a major Chardi Kala community event happening on the grounds of the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin. Chardi Kala, once again, this Punjabi expression used by the Sikh faith to underscore internal optimism, great anticipation about the future, even in the wake of tragedy, of huge setbacks, which this plainly was and is, a sense of movement forward. A Chardi Kala community event, 11 to 3. You can show up whenever you would like. It is a part of a program going on the grounds, outside and inside. So what's happening? Literally, beginning in about an hour from now, a Chardi Kala community event at the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin, outdoors. A number of different community, civic organizations presenting information about anti-violence initiatives, about ways in which you can have a greater involvement in civil rights and human rights in our community and beyond. Tremendous resources available to you. It is free of charge. And then at the same time, 11 to 3, 4 hours of workshops and engagements discussions, of instruction, both formal and informal, about everything, once again, from civil rights to ways in which youth and middle-aged people and older people can become involved in their communities. There's going to be a session on turban tying, believe it or not, understanding what the significant symbols of the Sikh faith are all about, including the turban, which we talked about a bit last week in our program here. A great opportunity to learn more about the Sikh faith, to be there, to let people know that you support not only this particular congregation, but congregations of people throughout the United States of America and across our nation. That 11 o'clock to 3 p.m., there is a registration possibility, but you can also simply show up and be there at the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin. And then tomorrow morning, at their regular services, a time of a tribute to the departed souls, additional speeches and presentations made well-wishers to the congregation, memorializing the 7 people lost, the folks who were injured in the course of this horrific tragedy. All of that taking place at the Sikh Gurdwara, the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin in Oak Creek. Its location, 7512 South Howell Avenue, the main street right in downtown Oak Creek, easily accessible from throughout the state of Wisconsin, even from northern Illinois, other places. 7512 South Howell Avenue. There is parking there, availability there. You are most welcome, and on behalf of the congregation leadership there, I invite you to be a part of the events going on this afternoon and again tomorrow, Sunday, August 7th, at the Sikh Gurdwara. As we begin to finish up today, we invite you to come back for our second hour talking more about all this. This is Morning Cannolis at WAUK Radio. And we're back. Good morning. This is Jim Santel with Morning Cannolis here at WAUK Radio, the Shaw in downtown Waukesha. We're at 540 AM, 101 FM. We are taking your phone calls throughout this second hour of Morning Cannolis. That number, once again, 844-967-2789. I'm in the studios here on beautiful Wisconsin Avenue here in downtown Waukesha. My producer is Connor, as he is always diligent and with me, taking your phone calls and sending those in for our discussion this morning. I promised in our first hour, and I'm going to make good on it in our second hour here, that we would talk more about the Wisconsin Sikh Temple shooting that happened 10 years ago yesterday, almost at exactly this time in the 10 o'clock hour of the morning, as members of the Sikh faith, the Sikh Gurdwara in Oak Creek, were assembling for their Sunday morning services. I'm going to tell you more about exactly what happened as a part of history, to ensure that we understand the past and we can learn from it and then also move forward, and also going to be talking this hour about the things that have happened since that time to make the world perhaps a bit better of a place for congregations like the Sikhs and Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists and Christians, people of all faiths, to get together and worship as they choose, nonetheless still facing huge challenges here in America, including threats of violence, which we have regrettably seen even after the Sikh violence on August 5th of 2012. Places like the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh and other places around our nation. And so let's begin by talking about who it was who did this, who engaged in this horrific violent behavior 10 years ago at this time. He does have a name, but consistent with our general journalism practices and the practices of our traditions, we're not going to say his name today. We know that when those individuals survive these shootings, we do know their names, and they are in the public domain because they are prosecuted. In this case, we know that the shooter killed himself, and we'll get to that in just a few moments. And because of that, he was plainly not prosecuted. We found out additionally that he acted alone, and so no prosecution coming out of this. But nonetheless, a lot of lessons to be learned about who he was, where he came from, and like so many other shooters that we now know about, including very recently in Buffalo and also in Highland Park, just on the 4th of July of this year. We know that they come from these terrible, horrible cocktails personal disaffection and disillusion and dismay and upsetness and anger with things beyond themselves and things internal to themselves. And the shooter on August 5th of 2012 falls into that category perfectly. We know he was born in 1971. He died on that day, August 5th of 2012. We know as well he was undeniably a white supremacist. He lived for a long period of time in Cudahy, Wisconsin. He was born and he grew up in Colorado, where much of his family still remains. We'll get back to that in just a moment or so. Part of his growing up, his life in movement toward this horrific day in Oak Creek was that he served in the U.S. military from about April of 1992 through October of 1998. During the course of that service in the United States Army, he repaired Hawk missile systems and became an operations specialist. Eventually, perhaps some of the first signals of things going wrong, he was demoted and received a general discharge at the time for what were called patterns of misconduct, including being drunk while on duty and being absent without leave. We also know, having investigated this matter and going back and trying to figure out where he came from, what he did, that this shooter was also undeniably exposed to and became a part of this unbelievably violent and counter-human notion that white supremacy is the future of America, the future of our state. And so even while he was in the United States military and exposed to people who promoting white power music and white power thoughts and principles, and that's where he got his first taste of this and his first connections to a group called the Hammerskins, again, a white nationalist, white supremacist group that ultimately landed him at the Sikh Gurdwara on August 5th of 2012. Even before that happened, however, we know that Page, after the shooter here, after he was discharged from the Army, he went to Colorado. He lived there where his family was. He was in a Denver suburb called Littleton from about the year 2000 until 2007. He worked there as a truck driver from about 2006 to 2007. Again, from that employment, fired after receiving a citation for impaired driving due to drinking. So again, this pattern of bad behavior, bad asocial, antisocial behavior, and that brought him again to Wisconsin. We know that during the course of his engagements with his family, not only in Colorado, but also on the East Coast, his family basically disowned him and recognized that inside all of this ugliness that he was promoting, the ascendancy of the white race and this white supremacy view that he had, even though his mother came forward after the shooting and said that she had very little contact with him for the previous 12 years, she was much aware of the fact because of his past involvement, his present involvement in that white supremacist group and his tendencies in that direction. She had all but disowned him after divorcing his father, who again remained in Colorado. Father, likewise putting him at arm's length and again removing him from any support that he may have had inside his family. A former friend at the time described him as a loner, and said that on a regular basis he had talked about an impending racial holy war coming to America. Many neighbors likewise commented on the same kind of behavior. We know, as I already indicated, that he became affiliated with this group called the Hammerskins, this white supremacist group, entering into the white power music scene in about the year 2000, became involved in several neo-Nazi bands at the time. And he founded a particular band called the End Apathy in 2005 and played in other bands called Definite Hate and Blue-Eyed Devils. And they were all of them considered racist white power bands. And the Southern Poverty Law Center, this wonderful, amazing group that tracks these kinds of things, the hate incidents in America, identified those groups, those bands, as being especially virulent, especially ugly when it comes to white supremacy. And Page, the fellow who was the shooter here not only engaged in those bands, but also a part of this white supremacy movement. The shooter also we know, eventually comes back to Wisconsin and finds his way back to Cudahy. He has a romantic interest there, and eventually she also disowns him and says this is not something that she can tolerate, and that relationship likewise devolves. We know that in the days and weeks right before this happened, people who saw him in and about Cudahy, other places in southeastern Wisconsin, were reporting on the fact that his behavior became more and more radical and more odd. He put up black covers over the windows at his apartment. Many people saying that, again, living alone, rarely leaving his apartment, avoiding eye contact with people in and about that time. So again, an awful lot of indications, as we have seen in other circumstances, that the shooter in this case was in fact losing touch not only with any sort of support that he might have out there, but becoming more and more alone. And sure enough, in the last days, not only did his girlfriend disown him as his family had done, but the very group that he had associated with, this white supremacist group, came to him and said, "You are no longer a part of our group." Why? Because they had discovered, true to their own virulent and ugly beliefs about America and about their own membership, that the shooter had previously dated a woman of Native American heritage. So they disowned him. He is thrown out of that group as well. And so sometime in late July of 2012, the shooter does go into a gun shop in West Dallas, Wisconsin, and he buys a handgun. He buys a 9mm Springfield semi-automatic pistol. He does it legally. He passed the background checks that were required, paid cash for that gun, along with 3 19-round magazines. And the owner of the gun shop, who is talked to, obviously investigated, as we'll get to, said that the shooter's appearance at that time that he was there didn't raise any sort of eyebrows, didn't raise any sort of concerns or suspicions at the time, even as all these other indicators from family and from other people who had some contact with him indicated that he was indeed devolving. Again, this horrific cocktail of personality dysfunction and particular behaviors that certainly indicated that something horrific was going to happen. We know that there were photographs of the shooter that appeared in some media reports showing him with a range of tattoos on his arms and bodies. Most of those likewise establishing this connection to the white supremacist organization. And that brings him then to August 5th of 2012. As we know, as I will tell you in just a moment, reaffirming in just a moment, he died that morning. He killed himself, and so we can never reach quite into his mind, but it is undeniably a hate crime that happened on that morning. His decision, obviously, to go into this place of worship, this place of peace, to identify and to attack people who look different than he is, who he probably identified as being contrary to his own white supremacist group theories, and so he attacked. And right after the break, we'll talk more about what the shooter did, his activities that day, also taking your callers about this revisiting of history and the lessons we take from this horrific tale of what happened that morning. We're taking those calls at 844-967-2789. This is Morning Cannolis, a special session in the remaining time this morning, talking about the Sikh temple shooting in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Join us for this discussion. continuing a special session this morning coming from the studios of WAUK Radio in downtown Waukesha, the Shaw in Waukesha, 540 AM, 101 FM. This is a special session of Morning Cannolis. We're devoting all of our time, part of last hour and all of this hour, to a reflection and a commemoration of the horrific hate crimes event at the Sikh Gurdwara, the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, being memorialized even as we speak, even as we get together and think about this time 10 years ago when a shooter entered into the temple and took the lives of 7 members of the congregation, injured many others, and forever changed the arc of American history, of worldwide history. And you should know as well that the events of August 5th are being remembered throughout the world, not only by the Sikh populations in our country, but in every country around the planet. And it is a part of that worldwide celebration that's also occurring right now in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. I'll remind you at the end of this hour about things that you can become involved in immediately after the conclusion of this program from 11 to 3 today and again tomorrow morning. Very much invited by the congregation to participate in this important time of reflection and commission to the future. Right before the break, I was telling you more about the shooter himself, the things that brought him to the site of the Sikh temple on August 5th of 2012. And so let us talk about what happened that morning. Again, not in graphic detail, but at the same time to have a greater appreciation for what happened, to animate our movement forward beyond this as well. You may be asking yourself, why, Jim, so much focus on this morning? I was the United States Attorney on August 5th of 2012. As many of you know, I was honored to be the presidentially appointed U.S. Attorney under the presidency of Barack Obama. Served for 6.5 years, a total, both as previously as the court-appointed attorney and then as the presidentially appointed attorney, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. And so working not only with assistant U.S. attorneys and DAs and other law enforcement in the Eastern District of Wisconsin, which is basically the eastern side or counties of the state of Wisconsin, but also others throughout the nation. And among the very things that I am honored to recall is our connection with Maine Justice and the support that was received by groups like the Community Relations Service, by the Civil Rights Division, as we responded in the wake of August 5th of 2012 to this horrific shooting. And so on the morning of August 5th, not unlike a morning just like this, bright and sunny day, it was a Sunday. Many people attending, Christians and Muslims, Jews, members of the Jain faith, Hindus, Buddhists, all sorts of faith, obviously expressing their religious beliefs and attending services that morning. And that was true also of the Sikh congregants. At about 10 o'clock, 10:15, 10:30 or so, people beginning to arrive on the campus of the Sikh Gurdwara right there on Howell Avenue in Oak Creek. Not yet undertaking the formal services of that day. Music almost certainly underway, and families being prepared what's called the Langer meal, Langar, for service and providing to anybody who would show up that morning. And so beautiful, wonderful morning, no indication, obviously, of the horrific events to happen. I happened to be in the office that morning, picking up on some things, some work to be done for the coming week and catching up some work from the past week. And so I recall well that phones began to ring at about 10:40, 10:45 that morning. Reminded very much in looking back at notes and history of that time that it was about 10:26 on the morning of Sunday, August 5th, 2012, that the first phone calls began to come in to law enforcement indicating that there was an active shooter at the Sikh temple in Oak Creek. About 10:26, presumably the shooting had already been underway as people got on their phones and began to call in and report on what happened. So what exactly do we know about what happened? And I will tell you that in the wake of this horrible disaster, this crisis, this tragedy for all of us, including the families of the victims and the survivors of it, the FBI, under our supervision with Maine Justice and others here locally, did in fact still pursue an investigation and had the honor and the great privilege of presenting to the families and to the members of the public as well the results of that investigation. And much of this is derived from that. Plainly, many accounts of people who are still alive today, who remember it well, the leaders of the Gurdwara, who you can meet this weekend and talk with them about the horror of that time, but also their wonderful commission and their response to this in a way that stands as one of the best ways of responding to a tragedy of this sort, embracing life, embracing a community, and even forgiving the shooter who did this horrific thing on that morning. He does go into the temple. We don't know if he was there before, but a lot of his conduct, his movement inside, which again you can see, you can be a part of that movement as you engage with the members of the Sikh congregation and others this afternoon in the workshops, in the congregation discussion sessions. You can be there and be with them as a way of support, but also of education. The shooter was there that morning and walked in and moved around inside the temple itself, moving down the hallways, moving into the Langer Hall, which is this place of congregation for members of the faith as they're getting together to eat and to congregate and talk and to have community and communion with each other, shooting repeatedly in that time. As you go in today, if you are visiting there today or at any time down the road, and again, the Sikh congregation always open and leadership inviting you to be there. To this day, they have retained one of the bullet holes that remains in the door jamb as a reminder, and it says, "We are one, August 5th, 2012, as a reminder of what happened on that morning. People killed that morning inside the Gurdwara itself. People also scurrying about. A great number of them went into a downstairs area, undeniably saving lives as a result of that quick movement. Others sacrificing their lives in the interest of preserving the lives of others that day. He then eventually moves out back into the parking lot and takes on other people. More individuals killed out in that parking lot, which remains, again, a place of solemnity and of civil rights history and of human rights history to this day, as do the environments inside the Sikh temple itself. During the course of his time back out on the parking lot, already engaging in the melee, the horrific hate crimes violence of that morning, he does engage Satwan Kaleka, the leader, the organizer, the founder of the Sikh temple. Every reason to believe, all the evidence suggests that Satwan at that time engaged the shooter and brought him to a situation where he would not have engaged in even more death, more violence that day. Satwan Kaleka gave up his own life in that struggle with the shooter at that time. And as a result of that, Satwan Kaleka lost his life in that moment. And then, as law enforcement, again, responding to these first phone calls, begins to appear, we're going to talk right after the break about the heroic behavior of someone named Brian Murphy and of Sam Lenda in response, and ultimately bringing this. This is Jim Santel, Morning Cannolis, devoting the remainder of this hour, virtually all morning, to the events of August 5th of 2012 at the Oak Creek Gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, where you can go this afternoon and tomorrow again to be a part of this community engagement, this community time of discussion and thoughtful reminiscing about and reverence to the past, thinking about the past, but also commissioning the future as well. We have a couple of phone callers who've called in, and thank you so much for being a part of our discussion this morning. Let's first hear from Mark. Mark, appreciate your phone call.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking my call, and it points out our need in this country to look at the whole meaning of acceptance of the other. Because unfortunately, this kind of thing is not unique to this century. Because the Mormons were driven west to Utah, through religious persecution that other groups have been not treated with tolerance. I mean that the Puritans, for example, didn't treat anybody who didn't think exactly like them with any kind of charity or compassion. Then driving them out of their colony into points outside of it, if they didn't execute them.
Right, and Mark, your concept about that the other, that person who doesn't look like I am, who behaves in a different way than I do, worships in a different way than I do. I think it's fair to say that's exactly what animated the shooter here, right? Looking at somebody, looking at a group of people, probably did not even know who they were. Probably didn't even be able to say that they're members of the Sikh faith, but nonetheless saying they're different. I am angry. I am angry about something that's happened in my own life, my own course of history, and I reach out, and your word tolerance, we embrace that, but we go beyond that, right? And even the stories you're telling about other populations in the nation, we don't just tolerate people, we also should be embracing them. We don't have to be them. We don't have to adhere to every view that's different from ours, but we do need to embrace our fellow men and women, boys and girls, and people of all backgrounds, of all races and national origins and mutable characteristics. That's what it's all about. And overcoming that bridge, Mark, as you're saying, to overcome that sense of the other, that is one of the great lessons of this horrific event in Oak Creek. An awful lot of that on display the past couple of days, and again today and tomorrow as well. So appreciate your call very much, Mark. As always, thank you for that insight and that important message to us this morning. Joe, you're also with us this morning. Thanks, Joe, for coming back with us and being a part of our discussion again this morning.
I thank you for bringing this up. It's a really, really important topic, and I think it's really important because violence reverberates. It doesn't stay in the past. It obviously, like waves, keeps continuing to affect people's lives. Certainly the most immediate people are affected, but it goes beyond that. People have their memories they pass on to other people, memories of people who aren't there, opportunities lost, memories lost, all of that reverberates. And I think it's important to understand that these people had with this horrific event, no one could have faulted them for going to hate, but they chose not to. They made a conscious choice not to go to hate. And I think it's important. I don't know if you spent any time on this, but I'll just reiterate in case any time has been spent on this, that the Sikh religion is very interesting in that it came about in response to the caste system in India, right. Where people were not equal, and that one of the most important tenets of that religion is that we are all equal, including women, including everybody from different castes. And that political line is also part of their religious life. And it's interesting in the ways that it's expressed because the Sikh religion has the highest number of people who serve in police force and in the military in India, far beyond their numbers that you would have in the census. It's not unlike the predominance of Native Americans who serve in our military, far beyond what their numbers are, because they believe in their culture that it's very important to be of service and to give back.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the... I really appreciate you bringing this topic up and enhancing our understanding of our neighbors here in the state and the times that they're going through, and that they chose to keep a bullet hole in their wall as a reminder, and find a way so that doesn't fuel hate, but instead fuels healing and reaching out to others. It's really commendable. Well, so thanks for bringing this up. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Joe, and so appreciate the phone call. So at least two very important things, Joe, that you're underscoring here. And yes, we did spend some time in our session last week talking about some of the fundamental tenets. And let's restate those because, Joe, as you indicate, it's important to do that. A fundamental notion of service is called sewa, S-E-W or S-E-V-A, as a way of really affirming this notion that I am a part of a larger community, exactly what you're describing, Joe. And again, as you indicated so very well, not just tolerance, but embracing other people and saying, you know what, you can be different than I am religiously in terms of your political views, your commercial views, other things that you've got out there, but nonetheless, you're a part of a larger community, and it is inside the faith itself. And Joe, you make that point very, very well. We spent some time last session talking about that. It is always, always good to reaffirm that, and just by way of additional encouragement, those are the kinds of things that you will see on display, Joe, and others who are with us this morning. Right now at the Oak Creek Gurdwara, Gurdwara. They'll be talking about those very principles that have animated this religious belief, this faith, for 500 years. They're doing that today, and doing that tomorrow can be part of that as well. You know, this other portion that you also mentioned, which is the legacy. During the course of the vigil last night, the children and the grandchildren of some of the 7 people who were slain, martyred 10 years ago at this time, spoke. And needless to say, hugely emotional, but also hugely telling about the ways in which a generation of people can overcome and forgive, even as their hearts are continuing to break. Joe, you make the important point that that's also a part of the Chardi Kala, this eternal optimism, even in the wake of great challenges inside the Sikh faith. It was on display last night. It continues to be on display among the families of the victims who spoke to the entire group, hundreds of people last night, more of them today and tomorrow, saying, you know what, this horrible thing happened to our community, our congregation, our faith, but, I forgive. Dr. Kulwant Dhaliwal, who is the chair of the Board of Trustees, said at the time, very, very publicly, very vocally, one of the first things out of his mouth was, I forgive the shooter. He didn't know who the shooter was. He didn't know what happened here. He didn't know all the history that I've recounted here this morning. Still said, you know what? Whatever that person did, I forgive. And yes, it has been the great story of this faith, of this community, the Sikh community, the Oak Creek community, the Wisconsin community. Frankly, I'll go far enough to say the entire national community that responded to this horrific event in a positive way, and that continues to be on display to this day. Joe, so appreciate as always, your phone call, your observation about the traditions of this faith, and again, this importance of legacy, that the negativity can be passed along, but also the positivity of things beyond yourself, and the notion that we live to a happier day, even while always remembering the dangers and the horrors of the past. Joe, again, a very important phone call. Thank you so much, as always, for being with us. We're taking other phone calls as well at 844-967-2789 as we talk more about what happened that morning. And again, the reason for doing this, to remember, to record our own history. It has been 10 years since this happened. And then also in our last movements here this morning, talking about the things that have happened since that time. Joe's phone call underscores a lot of that, but we're also going to talk about other ways in which the community, the government, federal, state, and local, responded to this event. Let's talk more immediately about law enforcement. And I mentioned right before we heard from Mark and from Joe about this amazing law enforcement response. We know in other venues it has not been a professional response. This was just the opposite 10 years ago at this time. First on the scene, Brian Murphy, truly a hero. Brian is around this weekend, as he often is in Oak Creek. He spends a lot of his time these days touring the country because he is much in demand, not only by law enforcement, but by community members, by members of religious communities as well, who want to hear his story, want to know more about what happened, but also want to learn from that. And Brian's got a great law enforcement story to tell, greatly instructive. He was there that morning. He was the first responder. We know well, as graphic as this is, that Brian was shot 15 times by the shooter on that morning. He lived to tell about the story. And beyond that, in the wake of his shooting, another police officer arrived. His name was Sam Lenda. And from a spot across the parking lot, Sam Lenda fired a shot into the shooter, brought him down, and the shooter himself then took his own life, bringing this event finally to a conclusion. Right after the break, we're going to talk more about what happened in the wake of this terrible event right here on the Shaw WAUK Radio Morning Cannolis. Thank you for joining us. Continue our discussion after the break.
You don't need a name and bright lights. You're a rock star. some tin foil with a glass pipe. Is your guitar? Now, yes, it is.
And we're back for our final segment this morning on Morning Cannolis. We're talking today in solemn memory, in pensive thought about the victims of the Sikh temple shooting on August 5th of 2012. And right before the break, I was describing once again the specific incidents that happened that morning. This absolutely positively amazing response from law enforcement in Oak Creek. Brian Murphy wrestling with the shooter, taking himself 15 bullets to his body. He believed at the time that he was going to die, and he would tell you that he was hearing from his sister, who he had lost just months before that, and calling him home that time as he was in the parking lot there. Brian brought to a police car, brought to the hospital in the course of some amazing work by his medical staff and his doctors, retained not only the vitality of his life, but now reinvigorated to talk about what happened that morning, including his heroism. He wouldn't call it that, but all the rest of us will, in bringing this shooter finally to an end. Also by Sam Lenda, who fired this shot, who brought him down. The shooter then did commit suicide in that moment, and the entire event over. But needless to say, a huge amount of law enforcement response, not just from Oak Creek, from throughout southeastern Wisconsin, throughout places throughout the state of Wisconsin, federal, state law enforcement, local law enforcement coming to the scene, from northern Illinois as well, other places around the country arriving to ask the question, how can I help? And equally, civilian organizations, victim witness support groups, all sorts of civilian organizations of various kinds showing up and saying, how can I assist? How can I help? And to Joe's point right before the break, talking about the ways in which this community responded in this incredibly positive way to this absolutely terrible tragedy that happened. I mentioned that Dr. Dhaliwal immediately said, we forgive this shooter for what he had done, even as, quite literally, the results of his horrific event are still there at the Gurdwara for a number of days. Eventually, the FBI, others do the investigation there, discover that Page, although he did have these connections, the shooter rather, he did have these connections to others in the area, in the Hammerskin white supremacist group, acted alone that day, and so no one to prosecute, but nonetheless an awful lot of lessons to be learned, including what happens next, as I'm indicating here this morning as well. A huge commitment by the congregation, including what it did a year later, and every year since that time has organized a reflection, a time of reverent thought about what happened. Every single year inviting the community in. At the 5-year mark, likewise had an anniversary celebration, and this weekend, once again, reestablishing for everyone to see, to invite all of us to be a part of this time of reflection. And you can go there right now, beginning at 11 o'clock to 3 o'clock this afternoon, this Chardi Kala community event, right there at the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin, 7512 South Howell Avenue. Groups of people organized to provide you with information, insight, how you can get involved. A great number of workshops by adults, by young people, talking about ways in which we can move forward from this inside the Gurdwara itself. If you have never been there, this is the time to do it. You can go at any time. And again, consistent with the general view of open doors, Gurdwara, meaning the house of the gurus, 4 doors of every single Gurdwara around the planet, around the state of Wisconsin, every place else there's a Gurdwara. 4 doors meant to be open, to invite you in, and that is the invitation made even in this moment by the leadership of the Gurdwara in Oak Creek to be there and participate in these events starting in just a few moments at 11 o'clock, lasting until 3 o'clock this afternoon. Likewise, tomorrow morning, And the final portion of this 5-day recollection of what happened on August 5th of 2012, a service inside the Gurdwara itself. Again, if you have not been there before, plainly a time of many people congregating, but be there, or be there some other time to partake in this wonderful religion that has so much in common, as many people have commented about already, with other religions, the Christian faith, the Muslim faith, the Jewish faith, the Jain faith, the Hindu faith, Buddhist faith, people of all faiths believing in things beyond themselves, committed to things that are more important than individual agendas and focuses. That was on display last night at the vigil, and also on display today as you go there. We know beyond that this congregation, these people are committed to making sure the world is a better place as a result of some testimony given by the families of some of the slain members of the faith before the United States Congress. There were changes in the way that today we record and memorialize hate crimes in this country. That was as a result of what happened in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. We know that today about half of the states of the Union, including right here in Wisconsin, have developed in various ways, implemented in various school districts around states, specific curriculums talking about Sikhism and the notion that it is among the great faiths on the face of our planet, having a greater understanding of world religion, the Sikhism faith being among them. That continues to grow. About half of the states now have established curriculums as a result of the Oak Creek event. We know as well then in Oak Creek itself, because of the wonderful work of the librarian there, a woman named Jill Lininger and her staff, there is now established the largest public collection of Sikh studies, novels, and nonfiction, music, poetry. You can go there, and again, Jill will take care of you and make certain you've got a library card. You can check out materials to explore further what Sikhism is all about. There is a library both at the Sikh Gurdwara in Oak Creek and also an expansive library at the Oak Creek in Brookfield. The librarians there will also welcome you. They will give you materials to take with you, materials that you can have permanently as a part of your own library to understand more about this important faith. We know as well that there are an awful lot of things in the areas of housing and employment and academics that have been expanded to include understandings, the kinds of things that Joe talked about, embracing people of different immutable characteristics, different faiths, nationalities, sexual orientations, gender identities, abilities, disabilities, familial statuses, economic statuses, all kinds of things devolved and coming out of this important, even horrific event in Oak Creek of August of 2012. All of that is a result of what happened there that we recognize and think back on at this very time. We know as well that the ugly voices of hate and the terrible acts of inhumanity that have happened here in Wisconsin, in every state of our union, in every civilized country on this planet, because of what happens in places like Oak Creek, good, sensible, enlightened, responsible people respond to those, condemn those, and both inside government and outside government look to those and say by word and by deed that those are things of disaffection. Those are things of separation and hatred and anger, and they are properly relegated to the dung heaps of human history because of the anger and the violence that they partake of. And it is a part of the recommissioning to go in a positive way, Chardi Kala, as you will learn as you go to the Sikh temple, to be positive and to embrace the good things in life, the good things that bring us all together. When you go there this afternoon, tomorrow, or at any time down the road, walk in and you will be formally greeted. You will be welcomed. You will also receive today a small hand bracelet. It is consistent with a thing called the kara, which is an iron bracelet that many Sikhs wear, which is a reflection not only of their commitment to God, but also to things beyond themselves, to behave well, to know that there are people and things that are important beyond themselves. But you will receive today a black, small rubber arm band, if you will, a small bracelet. It has on it the words Sarbat Dabala, and that also comes from the Sikh tradition of their basic scripture, which is the Guru Granth Sahib, Sarbat Dabala, meaning seeking the welfare of all. Seeking the welfare of all. That is on the handbands, the wristbands that you will get as you go there today in being a part of this community that is a part of us, a part of all of us. And again, strong encouragement to do that as we acknowledge what happened in our own history and remember back and commit to do not only things that reach out to people of all faiths, but people of all immutable characteristics in our nation. It has been my great pleasure to be with you again this morning. I thank you so very much for joining me for this special session of Morning Cannolis. I invite you once again to be a part of Oak Creek, be a part of Wisconsin, be a part of our nation in acknowledging what happened 10 years ago at this time. And join us again, not next week. We're going to take 1 week off, but we're going to come back 2 weeks from today with more programs here on Morning Cannolis addressing not only issues of law and government and civics and civil rights, human rights, but also the search for justice in America. Be with us then down the road. This is Jim Santel. Thank you for joining us here at WAUK Radio, the Shaw in Waukesha. Have a good week, have a good weekend, and we'll see you again, hear you again in 2 weeks.
Give it up.